and they think we
That's
have unlimited bank accounts to do the things that they want to do as well. So
Thank you
there's
for
that.
acknowledging that, Jeremy. It sounds like a man who knows what I'm dealing with. Sounds like a
I have
similar
4
situation
children
for you.
myself and all in high level sports, and so I get it. I get it. It's painful. And they're like, "Why can't we do 3 sports in one season?" I'm like, "Stop it. Stop it, because you cannot drive and you don't write the checks."
Right.
So there's that. So, Audrey, why don't you refresh everybody's memory? What is TimeForge? Talk a little bit about TimeForge. What is TimeForge? Because, I think it's probably been 18 months since your show went live, maybe a little bit longer, maybe even longer. Yeah, it's probably been longer because I've been living in Texas for over 2 years. And I remember recording back when I lived in California. So, for those that are less familiar with TimeForge, why don't you talk a little bit about what is TimeForge? Because I think it's going to be paramount to understanding where we go with this conversation with Jen and Rain.
Yeah, absolutely. So TimeForge is a workforce management solution. We primarily serve restaurants and general retail. We got started serving independent restaurants, and we did something right apparently, because we moved up market pretty quickly through word of mouth referrals from our customers. And so now today we serve businesses with everything from 2 employees up to 40,000 employees, and we handle the full employee life cycle, especially for the smaller independents. We will do everything from hiring up through running checks through one of our partners. And typically in mid market and enterprise groups, we get brought in for one of our special key differentiators, which is going to be around labor law compliance, especially on the coasts or dealing with Fair Work Week, or for labor optimization. We do some really crazy stuff with machine learning to predict future sales and then pivot that into ideal labor coverage.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. And I obviously know what you guys do, but for those that may not, workforce management encompasses a lot. And every time I watch you talk to people, there's like a lot of things. So what are some of the other types of things that people use the product for? You talk about labor enforcement and those kind of things, but even something as simple as punching in and punching out. And why don't you talk through kind of the breadth of what you guys do? Because I do want to make sure that people aren't lost as to all of the capabilities that TimeForge has, because again, it's critical to understanding why Jen's tool and what she gets the privilege of doing is so critical to where workforces are at and what they want to do in today's labor market.
Yeah, totally fair. Yeah. I think everyone now is a little bit more familiar with workforce and labor management than they were 5 years ago.
Yeah, because they
through,
have to be.
through necessity.
Uh-huh.
But it still is a very broad and very deep term, right? And so if we focus on just the TimeForge product specifically, businesses come to us for really kind of a point solution game where they're having trouble hiring, or specifically with employee retention is especially a deal right now. If they are concerned that maybe they're not optimizing their schedules, meaning they're not meeting customer demand at peak times with the appropriate staffing, if they need to find a better way to share employees between locations in a more efficient way for payroll or for overtime tracking without, upsetting their entire process flow, they might come to us and go, "Hey, what do you have?" And we have great solutions for all of those things. But we especially, if we kind of go back to basics, we especially get brought in just to help get everybody on the same page. I think any and TimeForge is really an operations tool. It does HR stuff, but it's for operations. Any effective operations tool is really going to be a communication tool at its core. And that's what TimeForge does. So we're making sure that whatever you're planning happening is based on good data. We're making sure that that plan is effectively communicated. Usually that's going to be a schedule communicated over to the employees. And then the system's going to do whatever it can according to your preferences as a business to make sure that that plan is what happens. And if something goes
Mhm.
awry, we're going to tell you what happened. Are your sales higher or lower than you thought they would be? Did someone not show up for a shift? Is someone late? Can we block someone from clocking in too early according to what they're scheduled to do? All of those things are baked into the system. So it's really trying to make store level operations streamlined and have the managers focus on stuff that time clocks and robots can't do for them, right? We want them engaging on the floor with customers. And that's the whole point of the system, is to get the managers out of the back office and make sure everybody's on the same page.
Well, thank you for that. And if anybody that is listening now hasn't heard the episode that Audrey did a couple years back, we go into depth as to why TimeForge is so awesome. Jen, Rain Instant Pay. There's a lot of different ways that people can take those three words, but why don't you talk a little bit about what Rain is? Because I don't want to say it's a newer, but it is kind of a newer industry technologically. What you guys are doing, and as I said to you pre-show, I'm excited because I've heard a lot about this over the last few years, and I can't wait for you to talk a little bit. What is Rain in general, and then we'll tie the two together to say why is Time for talking about Rain and what is Rain? So why don't you tell a little bit to our audience what is Rain Instant Pay?
Yeah, Rain Instant Pay it's technically an earned wage access provider. EWA, some people call it the acronym EWA. Some people call it early wage access. People call it pay on demand. I like to call it income streaming, but it's the idea that employees can access their pay in advance of their company's scheduled payday. So essentially, they can work a shift if they're a shift working employee. And it's also valid for salaried employees, but the idea that they can work a shift or work the day and at some point in the near future see, oh, wow, look at that. I worked 8.1 hours. I made $143 in gross pay today. And my company's awesome. So they're offering this voluntary benefit to me should I need to access my own earnings in advance of my company's scheduled payday. And you know what I do? So I'm going to push the button on my smartphone in my app and instantaneously transfer my own earned wages right into my bank account. Should I have some sort of emergency expense, or should I quite honestly just want to pay my bills on my bill cycle instead of on my company's pay cycle? Or if I'm someone from a younger generation that's just accustomed to on-demand everything, I maybe want to access my wages as soon as I've earned them. So it's become all the rage in the past 3 or 4 years. It's gained a ton of traction, and the restaurant space and hospitality were two of the industries that were really early adopters of this benefit. So for your clients or the folks that are listening, they probably have heard of, kind of the surge of pay on demand products that are available. And Rain Instant Pay is one of the vendors in the space that provides these benefits to employer partners.
Yeah, and I'd love to, I guess, ask a question because I've seen the with the proliferation of electronic payments versus cash payments, especially in the restaurant vertical. I, I'm old. I used to work in restaurants, and I would walk out the door with hundreds of dollars in tips, and every day I would get paid as a shift worker. When I was in college and in high school, I would get paid, and I would walk out, and as a 16 or 17-year-old, if I had a fantastic shift, I'd have a lot of fun because I'd have cash in my pocket. But as less and less people are paying with cash, more and more of these team members are getting paid on their paychecks the tips that they would have gotten. Do you think that's and is that one of the bigger reasons why you think that there's been such a growth in this? Because I've seen it, again, when I was working in restaurants, it was the Brinks truck or the cash truck would have to show up and pick up cash every day. And in talking some of our restaurant groups, now the Brinks truck, if they haven't adopted a solution like what you guys have, or they haven't chosen to put them on their paychecks, the tips, they're showing up with cash to give to the servers every day, which
Yeah.
comes at an expense to the business, and it comes at a pretty significant cost to both the service staff and to those people. Is that, I guess Jen and Audrey, why don't you guys take that comment and give me is that, am I thinking about it properly? Is that kind of the reason why you guys think this has been such a big growth in the last couple of years?
I'll take the first part of that question, and then I'm interested to hear Audrey's perspective. So earned wage access, or being able to access what you're normally going to get on your paycheck in advance of your company's scheduled payday, is predominantly a back of house benefit. It's for folks that earn enough of an hourly wage that they're having to wait 2 weeks, for that traditional paycheck. And that's,
Okay.
their biggest source of income. A separate problem is tipped employees who many of which no longer have access to their pay on, a daily basis, or their tipped earnings. Interestingly, I just want to make one comment about earned wage programs. Everybody gets the idea that employees want access to their pay. Nobody refutes that in the restaurant space, right? Nobody ever says to me, this is a dumb idea. We don't think employees will like it. Employees are crazed about it. It's gone from a nice to have benefit in the restaurant space to a need to have benefit. And we now are working with employer partners that are saying, hey, I should have launched this 2 years ago. Now I'm Now I'm launching this benefit just to be on par with what everybody else in the space is doing. So nobody refutes that, but what's less intuitive are all of the employer benefits that are coming from launching programs like this. And we're seeing like major increases in applications for shift workers when you pump that you have this, when you hype it that you have this benefit available to the applicant pool. We're seeing major reductions in turnover from restaurants that are utilizing this benefit, specifically with back of the house and hourly staff. But something you mentioned that I wanted to touch on, I also was a bartender, and I can remember that feeling of like having cash on hand every night. And I would think to myself as I was leaving my shift at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, on a Saturday night, and I would be walking with hundreds of dollars in my hand. And I'd think, I was going to give up my shift tomorrow and go to the Titans game. But you know what? I'm not doing that now because this feels good to have cash on hand. And the earned wage access benefit has the same psychological phenomenon for employees. It actually causes them to show up for work and to work more shifts and to pick up more shifts because they know they're going to have access to that pay as soon as they've earned it.
I love that. I love that. Audrey, why don't you, I guess, am I thinking about it wrong? And again, I appreciate you saying that, Jen, because that was a little bit of my assumption, because I've heard servers, we'll talk about the benefits and the recruiting to the businesses, because I think that's also huge, because to your point earlier. But Audrey, I guess, talk to me a little bit about why you think it's been such a need to have, not just a nicety, and people are looking for it. It's part of what people are looking for when they go look for a job. It's part of what restaurants are looking for when they're building out their tech stack that says, do you have an earned wage access solution that you can help me with? Why do you think over the last 3 or 4 years it's grown so tremendously?
Yeah, well, I think the level of creativity that the industry has had to employ in order to recruit and retain, right? The restaurant industry has always, I remember I wasn't in the restaurant industry in the 80s, but I've always
So
heard
were you
stories.
alive in the 80s? Were you
I was
alive in the 80s? Different conversation.
barely,
Sorry.
You missed a
barely.
fun time, Audrey. You missed a
You
really
absolutely did. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
But I have been in the restaurant industry. I did work in the restaurant industry, and I always heard stories, and still from folks who were in the restaurant industry in the 80s, still hear stories about how in the 80s it was very similar to the past few years as far as the labor concerns. And there was this extreme assumption everyone in the restaurant industry knew that wages were going to have to go up, that server wages would suddenly pivot to be increased, because what the restaurant industry has always struggled with, and probably will always struggle with, is that for the specific skilled tasks, the high skilled tasks of being a really good server or back of house employee, you can take that skill to another restaurant easily. And every restaurant always needs good people. And so what the restaurant industry struggled with then and is struggling with now, right, is trying to figure out how to make your restaurant differentiated from all of the other employer brands that are out there. And so we've gotten to see everybody get so creative. And I love it, because I'm always preaching employee retention as your primary goal and recruiting secondary. You got to get your culture under control first. And I think a lot of businesses who hadn't approached it that way over the past few years have learned that lesson and are now focusing on culture. And I don't mean the fluffy, fuzzy culture. I mean how things are done around here, right? The simple definition of culture. And we're seeing that happen. And part of that culture is every little process, right? You've got to take a look at how are people accessing their wages? We've still got restaurants that we run into that are doing paper checks. They want direct deposit, right? At a minimum. And so if we can get that just incrementally faster access to those wages, that is a huge cultural impact. And we've heard it from our customers for years, this problem of how do we get people to stick around? And we've have lots and lots of creative solutions, but this one has just latched on, I think, because the employees are driving it so hard.
Well, and I think it's funny that you say that, because that's kind of where my next line of questioning was going is I heard about this 4 or 5 years ago, but I never expected. This is just my own expectation. I never expected it was going to get to the national chain level. Like I fully expected it to be the mom and pop little guy, this small town USA. And then when I started seeing major brands doing earned wage access, it blew me away. Because a brand, Jen, you talked about Ruth Chris, like that brand should just attract high level people that want to come work there. And you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. Like I tell my kids, like just get over it. But at the end of the day, between the labor troubles of just acquiring good talent and then retaining good talent, as you talked about, Audrey, it's become something that with less I guess work and it's less difficult as technology has gotten more advanced and you're able to connect these two things together. It become a benefit that you guys can put out into the field. Jen, as you've gone out to employers, have you found it resonates better with the larger guys, better with the smaller groups, I guess, across the board? Because in my mind, I was like, oh yeah, it'll work fine for Joe's Pizza and Bar down the road. He's got 20 employees and he's doing fine. And but when I see it, rolling out at a national scale at really high level brands where servers might be making six figures waiting tables, I was like, holy smokes. I had no idea that was something that a server at Ruth Chris that might be making 100 grand a year, or a bartender or a sommelier at a fine dining restaurant might want to access those things. I'm like, they're going to be able to wait 2 weeks for their paycheck. But I guess tell me what your experience has been as you're talking to different brands in the restaurant space.
Yeah, well, first of all, just your comment about, people that are making six figures. My mom is doing fantastic, but she's in a hospital here in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm in her room and she's got the news playing in the background while I'm trying to work. And I perked up yesterday because one of the morning shows that she was listening to said, it's a fact that 72% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And that includes a large portion of earners that earn in excess of $100,000 a year. Has America become too expensive to live in? And that was kind of the headline. And that's true. I mean, people ask me all the time that I think the early stigma about what we do at Rain Instant Pay and providing access to wages was, oh, that's for very low income, workers who desperately need access to their funds. No, we see a significant amount of high income earners access their pay on a weekly basis. So, it's largely removed the stigma from employers' mind about, well, I need this for my low income workers. No, you need this because it's an expectation. We live in an on-demand society. People can drive an Uber and cash out 5 times a day. They can work for DoorDash and get money on hand. So it's also the gig economy jobs that have really fueled the change in thinking about what the average employee should have access to, right? But in answer to your question about the large chains, believe it or not, it was the opposite in retail. Retail was one of the first early adopters of this benefit, and Walmart jumped right in the deep end and launched
Wow.
pay on
I had
demand.
no idea. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll let you keep finishing, but that's amazing to me.
Yeah, Walmart has a program, and you'd be hard pressed to find any large retailer, whether it's Target or Walmart or Kroger, that does not have pay on demand benefits available for their employees. And I think that really caused other industries to feel comfortable. But in the restaurant space, we've seen a little bit of the opposite. It's more of a grassroots movement, especially with franchisees, being the earlier adopters. And then eventually the parent company or the corporate group, gets on board and launches a scale, more, a program more broadly. But we have seen the smaller franchisee groups be the ones to say, hey, I need this as a tool to recruit and to retain and to drive employee engagement. So it's interesting in the different verticals how it's evolved in a different way.
We've talked a lot about employee benefits and just kind of how critical this is to retaining the best, the best employees and even attracting the best employees, I guess. And I know we talked a little bit pre-show about the fact that one of our clients, Cheesecake Factory, has been doing this. And I always, again, thought it wasn't going to be something at a $2 billion brand that has 200 plus stores across the US would jump into something like this. But for 10 years in a row, they've been rated as one of those best places to work, and whoever does those surveys. I guess it sounds like it's becoming the expectation that people are just at a place where they have to have this. Jen, you were talking about the fact that retail is like, it's almost a given, and the restaurants are taking a little bit longer to get to that place. But do you guys see this as something that is just going to be an expectation for one of those places that's going to have the highest level of talent? Is that is that kind of where you think it's going, Jen? And I'll let you start, and then we can let
Yeah.
Audrey.
I
Audrey.
think 2 years ago, it was a nice to have benefit. And we were trying to convince employers that this is something that's going to help you attract talent and retain your employees. And you want to be on the front end of that curve. And now, the conversations are more around like, make no mistake, by the end of 2024, like it's going to be very odd if you're one of the restaurant companies that does not have this as part of a benefit. So now you're at a competitive disadvantage. So now we're seeing employers that are launching this, to catch up, because they're losing, to the McDonald's across the street that has a sign in their yard that says, "We pay daily, work one shift and access your pay." So that's definitely the trend that we're seeing. And I think in the restaurant space specifically, that will certainly come to pass by the end of 2024.
Well, and it's interesting. I remember talking to a restaurant client of ours, and they had people sitting in the parking lot when their cooks would leave for the night, offering them $2,500 signing bonuses to come to their restaurant to work. They'd like stand at the back door waiting for the cooks to leave and say, "I'll pay you $2,500 to come over." And like, that's insane to me. These are the levels that people are going to get quality of talent, and this is a benefit. And so, Audrey, let's talk a little bit about, how does this all work? It's all good and well. We're on the restaurant technology, guys. It's all well and good that says you earned this, you should be able to take it. I love the story, but call me a skeptic. Call me one of those people that says it can't be that easy. So why don't you talk us through the tech stack of, how do I even know that I earned the $143 and I can take out some portion of that $143 as part of my pay today?
Yeah, well, and that's one of the reasons that kind of the Rain TimeForge experience together is pretty critical. I know many of your listeners don't know me and haven't worked with me directly, but one of the things that I'm really proud of about my personal brand and about the TimeForge brand is that we not only stay pretty cutting edge on providing solutions to the industry, but we also stand behind our solutions and we spend a lot of time making sure that we're vetting the right partners. And that's what happened with Rain. Is it took us about 18 months to find the right earned wage access partner and really be sure about Rain. And they were very patient with all of our questions. But ultimately, what really makes the difference for for businesses who are using Rain and TimeForge together is the integration. So if we start talking about the technology, it's TimeForge is sending in real time the employee information at your business to Rain. It's also sending over those earned hours, what people are actually working, to Rain. So Rain isn't guessing like, oh, we think that they probably should be cashing out 8 hours. That's not how it works in restaurants. Maybe they should be cashing out 3, right? We don't know, without a partnership like Rain and TimeForge together, the business doesn't know and the earned wage access provider doesn't know. So it's really, really important, if your listeners are shopping for an earned wage access provider, to make sure that they've got the data to make intelligent decisions for their business, because some of the vendors out there are providing more risk to the business than what we allow with our partnership.
Well, I'd love to talk a little bit about that, because both of you guys have worked in restaurants in the past and work with restaurants every day, and they are a little bit of controlled chaos, and the data that's in the system is not always great. They don't always adjust their shifts every day. They don't always adjust people's punch ins and punch outs every day. They don't always have the proper wage access for that person every day. How do we mitigate that? Audrey's in the system, and accidentally, instead of putting her in at $15 an hour, I put her in at $150 an hour. And now that gets pushed to Rain. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with the risk of the fact that Audrey's going to take all of her money and not finish her shift and not do those things? Let's talk through that, because I do think it's critical. And when I talk with people about earned wage access, they always go, these people, this one time, this guy, I paid him cash and he left, and he, whatever. So how does that work? How do we ensure that the business, Audrey, you used a word that, while it's controlled chaos in the restaurants, and many of them are very risky. There are also some that are risk averse and don't. A little bit about how you guys manage that and how you guys mitigate that risk through technology, through punching in and punching out, ensuring the hours and all of that.
Yeah, I'll let Jen address kind of some of the risk minimization on the Rain side with the data that we send over to them. But I think it's really important to realize that there's always going to be some level of risk with
Mhm.
anything related to pay, whether it's earned wage access, payroll. TimeForge used to process pay. We had a payroll bureau. I'd never want to do that ever again. Leave the payroll to the pros.
I've heard the
Um,
stories.
but um, but there's always going to be risk around pay. The key is figuring out how you minimize it. And risk around pay doesn't keep you from having ADP to process your paychecks, right? There's risk with ADP. And I think that earned wage access is just like any of those other solutions that may have kind of risky things associated with them, like making sure your employees get paid. But like Jen said, it's not optional. So you've got to figure out how to reduce the risk as best you can. And Jen can talk a little bit about Rain and how it does that.
Yeah, I would say, Jen, why don't you explain to our audience how do you guys look at risk, and how do you guys mitigate that so that the restaurants feel more comfortable that they should offer this, not only that they should offer this, but that they're not going to be the ones holding the bag when employees maybe aren't the most scrupulous from time to time.
Yeah, and thank you so much for bringing this up, because this is, I joke that every potential employer partner we talk to, I could just issue them a recording that answers the same 9 questions over and over again.
Uh-huh.
Like, what about if an employee quits and then, there's not enough money in the paycheck? What if they miss a punch? Or what if we put in the wage rate wrong? Or what if the POS isn't transmitting? So it's all the same question.
Clearly, I've asked these questions of people, and I want you to answer them because
Well, I'm so
I
glad
want
to
our audience to hear this, because those are going to come up, I promise you. And maybe we can just cut that portion out and you can put it on
Yeah.
social for people. I
Okay,
love it.
maybe I will do that. Thank you. Don't let those considerations and those nuances of the restaurant space keep you from launching an earned wage access program. That's the first thing I'll say. So at a high level, the way that it works is we as the vendor are fronting the cash for the advance payments. And then we are getting repaid when the employee would normally be paid on their scheduled payday, or actually a couple days after that. So there's no impact to your cash flow as the employer partner. In fact, you're picking up a couple of days on the float on the back end after we've successfully, withheld our reimbursement, and then you're dispersing payroll. So really the liability rests with us because we're the vendor that's floating the cash, right? So we have some protections in place for ourselves to make sure that we're not making too much money available, which again, the importance of the TimeForge, Rain interface and relationship is paramount. There are we're not the only earned wage vendor in the United States. There are vendors that have less sophisticated connections that are making more mistakes and I guess there's more risk associated with their programs. Our data is coming to us from TimeForge in nearly real time. We're also capturing missed punches and updating the records as the pay period goes along. So it's a pretty robust system, and that makes us very comfortable with the risk associated with deploying the program. But in addition, we have some guardrails in place for ourselves, like for instance, we have to have both the clock in and clock out data in order to make any money available. So the employee doesn't clock in and then start seeing a balance accrue. After they've clocked out, we make money available to them, and we only make 10 hours available as an example. So let's say it looks to us like they worked an 18-hour shift. We assume that was a missed punch and they punched out the next morning when they came in. And so we only make 10 hours of that 18 hours available. So we have some things on the margin that help us, to not overdraw an employee's paycheck. And in the event that we do, which is extremely rare, and it usually has nothing to do with the timekeeping data or an approved punch, usually has something to do with something like an abnormal garnishment that an employee has on their paycheck, right? That we couldn't have seen that they had 4 or 5 child support liens that were going to hit their paycheck, and they were ending up with a 0 paycheck anyway. And that's not data that we're collecting on an employee. In that event, we pause the employee from the benefit and we just roll forward that recoverable balance to the next pay period. We can also see if an employee's active or if they've been terminated, But if an employee's worked hours during the current pay period and they get terminated, they're still going to get a paycheck. And we're only making 50% of that gross pay available to them to begin
Yeah.
with, because they also have to be protected for taxes and garnishments or benefits withholding information.
Or yeah,
Yes,
wage adjustments, hour adjustments, all of that. And I think that that's
yes,
one of those things that people, it's a benefit that people expect. And at the same time, we're not saying we're going to pay you in advance for stuff that you haven't worked. Like people in their head, I don't know why and how they make this stuff up, but they're like, oh, you're scheduled for 40 hours, so we're going to let you access 50 hours worth of time. It's like, why would you
right.
do that? You don't do it
Yeah.
on a paycheck, but people like, for whatever reason, in my conversations with people that earned wage access, they go like totally off the rails. As you said, Audrey, there's always risk in payroll. There's always risk in this. You guys don't let them take out 100% of it. You hold back some for taxes and the like. As an employee, before we talk about the case study, Audrey, that I know we talked about pre-show, as an employee, what is my experience? How does that work for me? So I'm now working at this shift role. I'm a cook at Ruth Chris Steakhouse, and Ruth Chris has Rain, and I want to be able to go access my shift pay, the 50%. What do I have to do? What's that? How easy is it? What does it look like to me as an employee? Because I think when we talk about the employer, when we talk about this case study, we'll dig super deep into that. But as an employee, what does it look like? So Jen, if you wouldn't mind, why don't you take that on for me?
Super streamlined experience. I can talk about this in 30 seconds or less. So the employee would find out about this 100% voluntary benefit through their employer, and they would be directed to, if they want to participate, they would download a free app from one of the app stores, the Rain Instant Pay app. They're first going to create a Rain account, very much like a Venmo account or a social media account. They're going to put in some data elements, create their own account, password protect it. They're going to sign some terms of use that say, hey, I know if I take advantage of this benefit, I'm using this third-party vendor, Rain, to access my funds. I know that my employer is going to be sharing my data through TimeForge with Rain. And I'm also authorizing Rain to get repaid on my scheduled payday by doing a payroll adjustment out of my upcoming paycheck. So they sign those terms and conditions. And then boom, instantaneously, start bumping their data up to what we're receiving from TimeForge. And if they've worked any hours during the current pay period, they literally see a cash balance that quickly. And the cash balance is simply, the number of hours that they've worked multiplied by their wage rate and made available to them at a 50% rate. And if they want to access those funds, they can push a button and insert their checking account and routing number, or insert a 16-digit debit card to instantly transfer funds into an
Okay.
account. And they go through a confirmation screen that says, yep, I definitely want this to come out of my upcoming paycheck, but I need it today, and boom, done. So the entire experience, creating a Rain account, linking yourself to the employer partner, accessing the TimeForge data, and making a transfer into your actual bank account is less than 2 minutes. And I've timed it many times. Oftentimes I get a notification from my Regions Bank here in Nashville, Tennessee that says, just received a deposit into my checking account. It's a really slick experience.
I love that. Audrey, I'm going to ask before you get into the case study, in that Jen talked about it being voluntary, but now I've worked 40 hours. I've accessed, I don't know, the 20 hours that we would allow, but I only took half of it. I only took 10 hours worth of pay. What happens for the employee on the paycheck, and how does TimeForge send that data to the payroll provider so that I get paid the delta in my normal payroll cycles, first and 15th or every 2 weeks? How does that whole thing work? Is that something TimeForge deals with? Is that something Rain deals with? As an employer, I always get, employee and as an employer, how does that whole thing balance itself out?
Yeah, that actually gets handled on the Rain side. So Jen can jump in, but it's really simple. They've got Rain has integrations or deduction files with all the major pay vendors. That was one of the first things I was looking for when I was trying to find the right earned wage access provider, because TimeForge works with so many different pay vendors.
Hmm.
And so that deduction file is just like any other deduction file with your pay vendor, and it gets loaded during the pay run, and it's all just kind of handled. Anything you want to add, Jen?
Yeah, I do want to touch on this real quickly, because I think some restaurant companies make the mistake of trying to select their earned wage access vendor based upon who they're partnered with on the payroll side. And that's actually not where the sizzle is. The sizzle is
Yeah.
who they're partnered with on the timekeeping side. Because as Audrey mentioned, the deductions are pretty standard. 401k benefit deductions, all of those things are pretty standard practice for companies. And we happen to be partnered, with ADP, with UKG, with all of the common ones, and any other vendor in the space is probably going to tell you something similar. What's not traditional is to be capturing punch data from employees in real time. What most companies do, what every company does in America, is at the end of the payroll cycle, they're taking the TimeForge data and they're dumping it into ADP right before they process payroll. To deploy a great experience for employees with an earned wage access provider, they have to be capturing that punch data further upstream. And that's something that's entirely new. Earned wage access really created the need for that. And so just if you take nothing else away from this podcast today, as you're looking for an earned wage access vendor, you should be looking at who they're partnered with on your timekeeping side, not necessarily who they're partnered with on the payroll side. Hopefully that makes
because I
sense.
do think that that's critical. I appreciate you bringing that up because I think it's, we painted this really rosy picture that it's all just going to work and they're going to go out and say, oh, I heard about Rain, but I want this new guy, and I have my own point of sale. They're doing the punches, but at the end of the day, that the magic is in the sauce of how it all comes together to give you guys give the employee the best experience and minimize the risk for the restaurant. And so, Audrey, I promise you twice now we can talk about this case study. So why don't you dig in and let everybody know about this case study that, kind of benefits and what you guys saw between TimeForge and Rain with this latest customer profile that you have.
Yeah, it's so cool, guys.
I know
I'm
it is.
so
That's why I want you to
proud
talk
of
about it.
So Bowie Foods has been a TimeForge customer forever, and they're just amazing humans on top of everything else. I love all TimeForge customers, but man, I really love Jody and RF. They do an amazing job taking care of their employees. This is one of the reasons I love them. So we'll talk pre-Rain, okay? They have been so dedicated to making sure that their employees can handle, their bills. They primarily have grocery stores, but they also have restaurants and C-stores. So they're a little all over the verticals that TimeForge primarily serves. And so they actually went with a different earned wage access vendor before I got to talk to them about Rain. And it was a nightmare. I have so many horror stories, and I'm sure Jody will be happy to also tell anyone who wants to know their horror stories. But I actually learned a lot from what she did and didn't like about communicating with that other earned wage access vendor, but what she was looking for in a partner. And so it was really good feedback. And I went, okay, good, because here's Rain, and they're not going to do anything that you just listed off that you hate. What Bowie was doing pre-Rain to try and take care of their employees' needs for earned wage access, they've been doing it for a long time. They have basically an employee loan program that they manage internally,
Oh my
were
gosh.
managing
Sorry.
internally. Yeah.
That's a lot
And
of work.
so
Okay.
and stuff comes up, so if you're working at a grocery store or a restaurant, stuff comes up. You get, your kid breaks a leg or whatever, and you just need a bill comes due, you need access immediately. They were doing an employee loan program, and they never said no to their employees when they needed that time. And it was administratively cumbersome is the nicest way I could possibly phrase that. But that's the kind of dedication that RF has to taking care of his employees. He was going to eat that administrative burden. And so Rain has been amazing for them. So the case study on Bowie Foods, within the first 2 weeks of Rain being rolled out with the TimeForge integration, 37% of the Bowie Foods employee base adopted Rain. 2 weeks.
Holy smokes. That's
2 weeks.
insane.
Isn't that awesome?
Well, and I think it highlights the fact that we don't even recognize that our team members want or need this service until we put it in front of them. Happen to be running a small business myself, and we have done personal loans to our team members when a kid breaks a leg or when they have a tire go out and they can't afford, a couple $100 for tires and they can't wait till their paycheck comes through, family medical thing, just whatever it is, life happens. And as an employer that also cares about our team members, it's probably such a need that's out there that we don't even recognize. And so I love that you're able to talk about that, Audrey, that it was such a high percentage. And I can only imagine, that there's a little bit of a honeymoon period, but I'm certain that type of thing, people then get used to it because they're used to who the earned wage is getting there, and they're used to being able to pay bills on the time that the bills are due, not on the time that they get paid, because Citibank and Chase don't really care when you get paid. They want their money when they want their money, regardless. The landlord doesn't care that you didn't get paid on the day that, so I guess we're running up against time, and I know that typically around the 35 to 40-minute range, people start to bounce off. So Audrey, tell me how people get access to learn more about what you guys are doing at TimeForge, how they can learn more about TimeForge, Rain, the integration that you guys have built. I'd love to let our audience know how can they learn more and figure out if this is something that they should be doing for their team.
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone's always welcome to reach out to me whenever needed. My email is just Audrey, Audrey, @timeforge.com. But if you specifically want to know about Rain and TimeForge and how we work together, or access the Bowie case study, it's at timeforge.com/rain. And that'll take you straight into an overview of everything. And there's even a form there if you want to learn more and talk to the Rain team.
Love it. I love it. And that's just rain, like the rain that would come fall from the sky, not some funky
Weather.
spelling with a Y or an N, like, I don't know. I was on the phone with somebody the other day and I'm like, how did they even come up with that spelling of that word? So the fact that they've just got traditional rain instant pay, I love it. Well, Jen and Audrey, thank you guys so much for joining us, educating our audience. To our listeners out there, guys, if you haven't already looked into this earned wage access, please not only look at what these guys are doing at TimeForge and at Rain, but as Jen gave you guys caution earlier, like it's not just everybody can do it. There's a lot of parts and pieces that go into it. And at the same time, this partnership makes it simple. It's pretty seamless for the restaurant to implement and, get this type of stuff without putting themselves at risk, similar to what Bowie Foods did with this other provider that they went with that didn't have the integration, and it ultimately ended up being more of a burden for them. Maybe they wanted to go back to their personal loan programs before that, and before Audrey walked them into Rain. So to our listeners, guys, we know that you guys have got lots of choices, so we appreciate you guys joining us. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so on either YouTube, on your favorite podcast player, or once a month, we send an email out about all of the episodes we have. Audrey and Jen, thank you so much. And to our listeners, make it a great day.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks for listening to the Restaurant Technology Guys podcast. Visit restauranttechnologyguys.com for tips, industry insights, and more to help you run your restaurant better.